One other thing I almost certainly will be talking about, of course, is the Prime Minister Labour Party conference, because Sir Keir Starmer has insisted he does not think that Nigel Farage or his supporters are racist. The Prime Minister sat down with our political editor, Beth Brigby, before the Labour Party conference in Liverpool wrapped up this afternoon. And Beth challenged him over his comments he made in that main speech yesterday, in which he said that the Reform UK leader hates Britain. Here's Beth.
The Prime Minister in Liverpool fighting back. How are you feeling?
Good.
Yeah? And with a clear opponent in his sights. Prime Minister, do you admire Nigel Farage as a politician?
I think he's a formidable politician, and of course I think he's the opponent as we go into the next election.
Drawing his battle lines against Reform UK, taking aim at Nigel Farage's plan to deport people who currently have indefinite leave to remain in the UK.
I think the policy is racist. I think it's immoral. I think that's a very dangerous place for us to go as a country, and it goes against everything that I believe in.
Do you think Nigel Farage is a racist?
No, nor do I think Reform voters are racist. They're concerned about things like our borders. They're frustrated about the pace of change. So I'm not for a moment suggesting that they are racist.
Do you think that he is caught in racist with this policy?
Well, look, I'm not going to start bandying...
well, you called it a racist
policy. The policy...
So is he caught in racist?
Well, look, I'm not going to get into labelling the man. I'm talking about the ideas and what he stands for.
A Prime Minister who wants to take aim at Farage, but not his supporters, as he looks to close the growing gap between Labour and Reform, and trying to walk the line too when it comes to President Trump. Donald Trump said under Sadiq Khan, London is being driven towards Sharia law, is it?
No, of course it's not.
Okay.
That's nonsense.
Isn't it that racist as well?
Well, it's nonsense.
Isn't it racist to accuse a Muslim mayor of driving London to Sharia law?
I'm not going to start down the road of discussing whether things said by others are racist or not.
Well, you just discussed Nigel Farage having a racist policy, so you literally are discussing that.
I have been really clear that the idea that in London we're introducing Sharia law is rubbish.
Is it racist?
It's rubbish.
Does it not bother you when he says things that you know are not truthful and you won't actually call it out?
Well, what matters to me is that the relationship between the US and the UK on defence and security and intelligence is the closest relationship in the world. It is what helps to keep us safe in this country. And therefore, of course, I work closely with the United States President. Of course, I have a good personal relationship with him.
The Prime Minister confident he can weather the storm. Prime Minister, you will lead Labour into the next general election.
I will lead Labour into the next general election.
Keir Starmer came to Liverpool to answer his critics, finding passion and purpose as he pitted his version of Britain against that of Nigel Farage. This a dividing line that has united the party and given the Prime Minister some much-needed momentum. He's set the battle lines into the next general election, but the much bigger and harder task is delivering on the renewal he says Britain so badly needs. The Labour government leaves Liverpool in stronger voice and brighter spirits. But the bigger landscape bleak as the party eyes a difficult budget and elections ahead. Starmer's battle only just beginning. Beth Rigby, Sky News, Liverpool.
Well, earlier I spoke to Reform's Deputy Leader Richard Tice from his constituency in Skegness. He told me that he thought Sir Keir Starmer's speech had given licence to what he described as the masked thugs and Antifa to target his party's leader. Have a listen to this interview. Richard, very good evening to you. I suppose my first question is, clearly you guys are quite angry, I might suggest, about what the Prime Minister's had to say this week. What are you actually angry about?
Well, the fact that he's essentially given licence to the far left, the likes of the masked thugs Antifa, to essentially come at us, come at Nigel Farage. He literally used the words arms, take up arms and attack, go for the enemy. I mean, just the most extraordinary language, if we use that sort of language against our political opponents, I mean, we'd have had the police knocking on the door, for heaven's sake. It's just outrageous and totally unbecoming of a Prime Minister of the United Kingdom.
But at the same time, Richard, I mean, this is the rough and tumble of politics, isn't it? I mean, look at what some people inside Reform have said in the past, what the President of the United States has said in the past, stuff that you've agreed with. I mean, this language is battered around all the time, isn't it?
No, it's not actually. Not suggesting that you take up arms, particularly at a sensitive time just a couple of weeks after Charlie Kirk was brutally assassinated, and just 2 weeks after Nigel's security has been downgraded by 75% by the government. So, yeah, frankly, this it's just completely inappropriate. And yeah, you know, this is supposedly the kind and compassionate bunch on the left. Well, far from it. These are the masked thugs, now led by a prime minister, it seems, who is inciting violence against his political opposition. Well, it's disgraceful.
I'm sure that is not what the Prime Minister would say he was saying. But Richard...
It's literally what he said on his speech. He said, take up arms against the enemy.
Elon Musk, what do you think about him? And he had to say at that rally in London just a couple of weeks ago. I mean, talked about civil war in this country.
He didn't, and I said that was inappropriate language. I mean, fine, we believe in free speech, and yet there's rough and tumble, but there is such a thing as there's a difference between free speech and inciting violence. And as far as we're concerned, the Prime Minister crossed the line. That's a matter of judgment. That's our judgment. And let me tell you and your viewers, if anything happens physically to any of our Reform activists or elected councillors, frankly, I will hold the Prime Minister personally responsible.
Yeah, but people in the past talk about fighting racism. They don't literally mean it, Richard. You know this. I mean, by the way, they've been pretty exemplary language used. So, Richard, but by the way, so Nigel Farage once said, any normal and firm-minded person would have a right to be concerned if a group of Romanian people suddenly moved in next door. Why? I mean, that in many ways.
That's not saying take arms. I'm sorry.
But Richard, you honestly literally think the Prime Minister
literally suggested he gave licence to Antifa yesterday to take up arms. He incited violence. He is responsible personally for anything physically.
I mean, I'm sorry, but I don't think the Prime Minister intended that way, or any right-minded person would think that they literally meant taking up arms.
I'm just telling you, those are the words he used. So if anybody does take up arms and breaks the law, he is personally responsible. And he would hold us to account if we use that language. It takes two to tango.
But language does matter. I mean, that's an argument you would make, even in a country with free speech. I mean, have you been concerned by some of the statements? I make the point about Romanian people because, you know, language has been... If you were a Romanian person in this country, you might feel uncomfortable with some of the language that's been used by members of the Reform Party, previously UKIP and Brexit before. And by the way, it's not just Romanians, but other groups as well.
It's a daft point. We haven't said take up arms against your political opponents. That's what the Prime Minister said, and he will be held to account for it.
OK, just on security, do we know the reason why Nigel Farage's security detail has been downsized?
I tell you what, why don't you ask that question to the Prime Minister? Seems a bit coincidental to me. A couple of weeks ago, the security gets downgraded, and then you have a Prime Minister that incites violence against Nigel Farage from the far-left thugs, the Antifa lot.
You're genuinely suggesting there is a conspiracy here to somehow harm Nigel Farage from inside Downing Street?
I'm just telling you, we are absolutely furious. And this is, we're just very, very angry with the Prime Minister of this country, who's making us all poorer and is now inciting violence against his political opponents. And it's a coordinated attack with the other cabinet members, one of whom suggested that Nigel Farage had flirted with the Hitler Youth. Absolutely shameful, disgraceful.
Indeed, I mean, we're trying to find here in the speech, what is the direct quote, Richard? Sorry, I haven't got the Prime Minister's script in front of me. What did
I've got better. That's That's what he said. He used the words enemy, and he said he'd take up arms.
Yeah, but it obviously matters in context. I mean, I could use the word enemy here.
The context was that he was having a brutal verbal assault against Nigel Farage and reform. That's the context. It was, by the way, the context of most of his speech, the context of most of what he's been saying in recent days. Look, we're going up in the polls. He looks ridiculous, but regrettably, we do live in a more tense, anxious time, partly because of some of the hopeless things that this government has done, and people are very angry. Yeah,
obviously we know that David Lammy did some row back on the Nazi point. My producer has found the quote. Apparently, is that those who are the enemy of national renewal, essentially that we should fight them. That just sounds. Because they're an enemy of national renewal. That sounds like... But people use the word fight and taking on their enemies in politics all the time. You and I have been around politics for a long time. That's quite a stretch, I would suggest here, Richard.
No, I don't suggest that at all. That's the language, and you've just reaffirmed that I'm correct in...
Well, we haven't found the word arms.
Our fury at what this Prime Minister is doing. He's giving licence to the likes of Antifa, and we're not having it. We're not having it. We're calling it out for what it is. He's the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, right? He's not the head of some group of thugs around the street corner.
Do you think that you or Nigel Farage has made other people uncomfortable in the past, potentially incited people to be racist or xenophobic in the past? You don't think anything you've said or Nigel Farage has said over the years has done that?
I certainly hope not. I don't think so. And I've never used the sort of language that the Prime Minister used yesterday in his speech that I can recall.
There you go. That was Richard Tice speaking to me a little earlier. Lots of shaking of heads during that interview, and we'll get the response from the panel in just a second. But let's get the response to what we heard around Nigel Farage's security, because the House of Commons has said that decisions about protection are subject to a rigorous risk-based assessment, but they don't get into arrangements for specific MPs. And the Home Office on this have said decisions on MP security are made independently of ministers. You'll also have heard my to and fro going back and forth with what the Prime Minister actually said during his speech. As I made clear, I didn't have his speech in front of me as I was conducting that interview. But for clarity, here is what the Prime Minister had to say.
Let me say this, because whilst we must come together to fight reform with everything that this movement has, we must go into that battle armed, not just with words and condemnation, but with action. And that means tackling all the problems that they prey upon.
So there is the direct quote. He did say about taking up arms. Many people would not take it literally, but Richard Tice and others are furious that some might. And isn't that kind of the point, Luke? I mean, does Richard Tice have a point that, words matter in politics, and sometimes they, even if the Prime Minister, and he clearly didn't mean it literally, but can get misconstrued?
I mean, I was watching that interview, and it was one of the most extraordinary 6 minutes of an interview I've seen from a politician. It was an absolutely ludicrous argument. I think, as you've just shown in your clip, Prime Minister is talking about a battle of ideas. He's talking about, we have to take up arms, and talking about the context of fixing the problems in the country that are leading to reform doing well in the polls. I think this is a ludicrous argument they're trying to manufacture here. Words do matter, and they raise some really important points in the sense of, sadly, in the last 15 years, we've seen a number of MPs either murdered or serious violence against them, and there is an issue about MP security. But I think to liken what the Prime Minister has said in a rhetorical flourish to the charges that Richard Tice was making, I think it speaks for itself that it's frankly ludicrous.
Well, I take what you say, Luke, and take it a step further, which is that actually it could be said that now both Sir Keir Starmer and Reform have just taken to slinging mud at each other. I think everyone should be careful with the words that they use. And rather than hurling insults at each other and complaining about what each other has said, it'd be far better to focus, for everyone to focus, including the Prime Minister, on solving the problems facing the people of this country. just one aside, I do think there is something to be looked at around security of members of parliament and of ministers. Again, these things are looked at independently, but my own personal gut feel is the balance is not right, not only for this one particular member of parliament, Nigel Farage, but actually for many others because of the sad deaths that we've seen of Joe Cox and Sir David Amess. So I think there is a problem there. But actually, this is not about that. This is about hurling of insults to just shy away on both sides, including from Labour, shying away from the big problems facing this country. He could have used the speech to set out a plan on how he's going to get the economy out of the mess it's in, how he's going to avoid the tax rises that are now undoubtedly going to be hiking on people across this country, and he didn't. He instead chose to hurl insults.
Well, I'm glad you're using this platform to get those key policy areas across. But there is a point here, is that Labour have spent a lot of this week playing the man and not the ball, haven't they? They've deliberately made a concerted effort to go for Nigel Farage. And, in politics, it should be a battle of ideas, not necessarily about one man. I mean, I dread to think how many times Nigel Farage's name was mentioned on that platform stage this week at Labour conference.
I think what you've seen this week is the government, from the Prime Minister downwards, trying to set the choice that will face this country in 3.5 years' time, which is between Keir Starmer and a Labour government and Nigel Farage. And I think it's a fair challenge. I think what the public want to see is the Labour government getting on and delivering. And I think that's what we saw this week in a number of the speeches, was Labour cabinet ministers getting to grips with governing and getting on and delivering. I think there is an audience for these speeches, and I think that part of the speech probably was for the party hall. And it is a 20-second clip in an hour-long speech. I think, frankly, I think if I was being cynical, I think Nigel Farage and Reform don't want to talk about their policy on indefinite leave to remain, and therefore have sort of blown this issue up because they'd rather have a row slanging match than talk about their policy.
Just very finally on this, though, may I also suggest, if Nigel Farage was mentioned a lot, that one person who wasn't mentioned a lot was Kemi Badenoch and the Conservative Party. Isn't that a bit of a worry for you, that whether it's the Lib Dem conference, whether it's the Reform conference or Labour conference, the party that's not mentioned is the Conservatives?
Well, I think there was some analysis done of showing all the different cabinet ministers and who was talking about whom. Yes, Nigel and Reform got a lot of hits. There were plenty of hits about the Conservatives. But the point is, Kemi and her team and my former colleagues who are in Westminster, they're just getting on with the job of coming up with a fresh plan that's going to solve those problems on the economy, which Labour has no answer to.
They do seem, I have to say, we're not spending too much. They do see a little bit of a political irrelevance at the moment. Now, maybe in part is because, as you say, the Conservative Party are working through policies after a massive defeat to kind of get things right.
Yeah, look.
Or maybe it is that actually they're just not in the political picture anymore. And if that's true today, it might be true in a year, 2 years, 3 years' time.
Well, the British public decide these things, of course, and that's part of being in a democracy. Yes, it was the worst result that the Conservative Party had ever had. Worse than 97, worse than 1906. Yeah. It was a terrible result, so let's not pretend otherwise. And so, yes, we are adjusting. My former colleagues are adjusting to being in opposition. But, the important thing in opposition is not just to hurl abuse at each other, as is happening with Nigel Farage and Keir Starmer. It's to actually work on the solutions that this country needs. And so, I hope, and we'll see what happens next week at the party conference for the Conservative Party, that there will be some clear policies outlined, and these are some of the solutions we think should be brought forward. And if the government wants to nick them, then brilliant, because then we'll have done our job.
Maybe even some unity too. Just very funny on this, look, is it also fair to say, though, now that actually for the Labour Party, they're talking up for reform because that's the battle they actually do want to have? In essence, they feel that it's a greater dividing line than with the Conservative Party, and that there's a kind of political expediency here maybe for Labour to make it into that battle. Just by the way, it was also true for the Lib Dems to do exactly the same the week before.
Yeah, I think the Prime Minister and the government are reacting to where the polls are, and the polls have shown consistently for the last year or so that Reform are the major electoral test. Now, whether or not that's where we get to at the general election, time will tell. It's in the government's hands. The good thing that is going for the government is a general election is 3.5 years away, and they have time.
Well, looking at
and
the
they are in
current
power,
polls, I mean,
and they're in
need
power
that
and they can govern. And I think what we did see this week was the government actually starting to, get used to being in power. I think there were some teething problems in the first year, and doing things. And ultimately, they will be judged come the election on whether they've delivered.
Teething problems.
That's an understatement. Master's understatement there. I mean, the fact that one of the first decisions was to take away the winter fuel allowance, taking away the right of farmers to pass on their land to their children to produce good quality food for our country. The fact that now the Prime Minister and the Chancellor can't deny that they're going to hike VAT. I mean, these aren't just teething problems.
Okay.
This is the theory of opposition colliding with the reality of government.
Well, gentlemen, the great divide between Labour and the Conservative Party is at least very alive in this studio, if not necessarily in the rest of the country.